Hi, thank you all for joining us today. And we'll just wait a moment more as others continue to sign on. We're right at noon and I see that people are still joining us. So I think we have most of our group on. I'm Tom Saunders. I'm President and CEO of the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. And I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. We have a big turnout for this, and that's because it's an important topic for Pittsburgh and for our region. So we're fortunate today to have a wonderful speaker, Jeff Bergman, and he's our Director of Community Forestry at the Western Pennsylvania Conservancy. So as you all know, we have a number of different programs. We do land protection work, we do watershed work where we restore and protect our streams. We have the Natural Heritage Program where we protect threatened and endangered species. We own Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water and the 5,000 acres around it. But one of the important programs at the Conservancy also is our Gardens and Green Space program, where we do all sorts of green space work essentially in the city and around our region. But a big part of that is our urban forestry work. So Jeff runs that work, and he and his staff have planted 37,000 trees, street trees and park trees in Pittsburgh and the communities near it and a few other communities around the region. And so as you all walk through different parts of Pittsburgh, so many of those shade trees that you see along the sidewalks were planted by Jeff or his team. It's making an extraordinary difference in revitalization in the city because, of course, those trees are very important to the aesthetics of our neighborhoods and our urban streets. Jeff and his crew also plant trees in the parks around the city and partner with a lot of the communities in the suburbs nearby. And then in a few other places in Johnstown, Ligonier, and Erie, they're doing street trees and park trees in those other communities around Western Pennsylvania. So these trees bring a lot of different kinds of benefits, and Jeff will tell you more, so I don't want to steal his thunder, but they have a big aesthetic role, as I mentioned, in revitalization, but they also have environmental benefits of a number of kinds. They help to manage stormwater, they help shade our streets and sidewalks, and then they help to sequester carbon, which of course helps with climate change issues. So I'm going to keep my introduction short for a change and turn this over to our expert, Jeff. I will say that as Jeff speaks, you're welcome to type in questions on the chat feature if you like, and we'll take those questions at the end if we have some extra time. But with that, Jeff, I'll turn this over to you.
All right, thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I'm very pleased to be here to share with you some information about what we call our community forestry work. We've got a lot of information to cover, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if you bear with me for a moment. Okay, all right. So I'm going to jump right in. You know, many of you are members, and you probably or may have heard of the TreeVitalize Pittsburg project. We consider that our flagship community forestry project here at the Conservancy. And through that program, we've planted more than 34,000 trees with more than 13,000 volunteers since 2008. The project is a partnership. I think almost all of our work at the Conservancy is successful in part because of good partners. TreeVitalize was launched initially by the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources in 2004 in Philadelphia. And that was in response to the Secretary of DCNR's concern about the loss of tree canopy in urban areas throughout the state. You know, a healthy tree canopy provides so many benefits, as Tom mentioned. Those environmental benefits, economic benefits, social benefits, health benefits. And we really have looked at trees through TreeVitalize as public infrastructure that are providing benefits to the community. In 2008, TreeVitalize Pittsburg was launched here to address the loss of canopy in Pittsburgh and the surrounding area. DCNR asked WPC to be the lead partner. We've had a long-standing relationship with DCNR over the years, land conservation and developing parks and so forth. But we were given some leeway to develop a partnership that was really custom designed for Pittsburgh. And so we brought together what we thought were the right partners, including the city of Pittsburgh, since they're the main property owner in the city. Most of the trees are going in the public right of way. The Allegheny County Parks Department, Tree Pittsburgh, another nonprofit that you may be familiar with, who focus on a lot of community engagement and tree care. And so we pulled these resources and we pulled our collective expertise to develop this program from scratch for the city of Pittsburgh. An important thing to know about the program is that it's actually an application-based program where people in communities throughout Pittsburgh and Allegheny County who are interested in trees come to us and they go through an application process. So that's a good thing to consider. So. Okay. One thing to note, here's just a little business. Sorry for the interruption. People should use questions and answers, not chat. So just to clarify that. Okay, so this slide right here, showing this community tree planting underway, I like to use. It's a few years old, but it shows a lot of the elements of our the community forestry program, TreeVitalize. So a few things to note. I made a reference to our expertise. We have Matt and Mark there in the yellow safety vests. They're two project foresters. And so they're both trained as foresters, but they're also certified arborists who specialize in municipal forestry. So they understand tree plantings in urban areas. So that's one of the foundations of the project, is having the right expertise as a foundation for the work. Our mantra is the right tree in the right place. So where every single tree goes is reviewed and assessed by these foresters, so that we know that we're taking into consideration overhead utilities and underground utilities and locations to proximity to intersections and driveways and things like that. So we never want to put a tree somewhere where it doesn't fit. Another thing that I like to point out here is that community engagement and education is central to the project. So we've baked that concept into tree plantings. We didn't want to just plant an initial 20,000 trees with staff or hire landscapers to do it. We thought in the beginning that, well, we can save some money using volunteers, but we also want people to understand the value of the trees and help us plant them. But I think that this community engagement and getting people's hands dirty has actually contributed significantly to the sustainability of the program. If you look at the trees, you can see that it's a fairly significantly sized tree. We refer to these trees as balled and burlapped. If you look down at the bottom of the tree, there's a root ball that has been wrapped in burlap, and that's how it's prepared at the nursery. But these trees weigh about 250 pounds. And when you help plant a 250-pound tree on a 39-degree November morning, you remember that tree and you want that tree to survive. And so it's very important to keep in mind that engaging people and making sure that people are connected to these trees is really important to the success of the program. The other thing is just thinking about safety. We always are making sure that all the people that we work with are safe. You see everybody with their safety vests there. And so these are all very important components. So a little bit about the process. Our current WPC community forester, that's Brian on the left there, and Kinsey Miller, she's a forester at Tree Pittsburgh. They go out and they're looking at every single location where a homeowner has requested or a property owner has requested a tree. So you can see them looking down at the sidewalk. They're looking at the condition of the curbs. They're looking at the condition of the sidewalk. Every single tree we plant, we're following city ordinances. And of course, we work very, very closely with city forestry and the city forester. But they're out there looking at all the utilities and all the site conditions, and then assigning a tree that is best suited for that place. One of the things is that diversity is also very important. So you never want to have too many types of one tree. In case you have a problem such as, Dutch elm's disease or the Asian longhorn beetle, which has been problematic in other parts of the country. But if you have one kind of tree, too many of one kind of tree, and they're susceptible to a disease, it can really negatively impact the health of the community forest. So we say a diverse forest, just like diverse communities, are stable and healthy. So they're out there looking at every single planting site that's requested. And we don't just order the trees from the nurseries. We actually, Brian and some of our other staff actually go out to the local nurseries and they look at every single specimen that's going in the ground. So Brian is out there, he's looking at branch structure, any signs of disease or weakness or anything like that. And tagging, you can see him tying a little tag there on each tree. And those trees will later be delivered on a rolling basis as we implement the tree plantings, which occur mostly in the spring, throughout March and April, and in the fall, mostly in October and November. And all of our trees, by the way, one of our quality specifications is that all trees must come from within a 100-mile radius of Allegheny County, and that's to help ensure that the trees are really acclimatized to our local climate and conditions. When we get to planting day, many months have passed since the community has applied to us. The applicants have gone through tree tenders. The foresters have done all the site assessments and selected the trees, and the trees have been dug. So in the morning of the plantings, our staff are there a couple hours before anybody else shows up. And we have those contracted planting site, planting tree pits that have been prepared specifically for us. Every street tree pit is a minimum of 30 square feet and has been excavated, whatever's in there. That part of the process is expensive, but we learned the hard way early on that you can't try to dig underneath the city sidewalks with volunteers because you never know what you're going to run into. So we have all these planting areas prepared, but our staff arrives very early and they offload the trees from the delivery, and each tree is set next to its planting site. So a lot of this hard work is done ahead of time. So when the volunteers show up, we know that we can get those trees in the ground pretty quickly. One thing I'll add that I think is really cool is that we actually, between our staff, partners, and equipment, we have the capability of mobilizing 5 tree plantings simultaneously. So on any given Saturday in the spring or fall, we can have up to 5 tree plantings happening throughout the county. Another thing that we learned the hard way early on was you have to have a really organized tool setup. You can't just have a pile of tools and send people off to plant the trees. You really have to have the right number of tools and make sure everybody has what they need, but not have too much. So we have a whole formula that we developed over the years. We know exactly how many trees. If we're planting 15 trees in Manchester, we know we need 17 shovels and 3 stake pounders and 4 rakes and whatever. And so we know that we can just get all of these things set up the day before and show up ready to go the morning of the planting. And we start things out with a very thorough planting demonstration. You know, folks show up and they have their coffee and their bagel or what have you. They sign in and they're ready to just grab a shovel and get going. But we prep people that they need to be patient and hang out with us while we give them a very thorough planting demonstration. So one of our friends at Tree Pittsburgh, Jake, he likes to say that this is the most important day in a tree's life, and there's no point in rushing how it goes in the ground. So this is Brian and one of our other staff members, Sean, giving a tree planting demonstration here. This was in Morningside in the fall of 2019. And then we set folks loose. We recommend people work in groups of 3 or 4. This is a planting in Shadyside. And we really let the volunteers do the work. Now we have a high staff to volunteer ratio. We actually control how many volunteers can actually sign up for tree plantings because we have a formula for that. You actually don't want too many people. You don't want 50 people to plant 11 trees, for example. You want everybody to have an experience. So while we're there, we let the volunteers do the plantings, but we're there circulating constantly to make sure that people know that, answering questions, making sure everything's going okay, maybe helping folks get the root ball into the hole. but people get really into it. Usually after the first tree goes in, you just get rolling. And really our formula allows us, between the tool organization, the volunteer recruitment, and all the staff capacity and equipment, we know that we can start a tree planting at 9 a.m. and invariably we can wrap up by noon, and the volunteers have lunch and everybody feels great about it. But we know we have that formula down, and it's really been very helpful for us and stress reducing to know that we can get this work done through our methods. And then afterwards, all the trees in the end are staked and mulched. And then we provide watering materials for the trees. So everybody that's requested a tree, they know that they are responsible for watering the tree the first 2 growing seasons. And what we call a growing season is basically mid-March through mid-October. Those first 2 growing seasons, it's essential that every tree gets about 20 gallons of water per week. So you can see those white 5-gallon buckets down there on the right. They have holes drilled in them. It's a really good, easy way for a homeowner. You fill that bucket up 4 times, once a week, and you've got your 20 gallons. And so that's a really easy way for people to keep track of their watering. And so I'll show you a few before and afters. This is actually up in Troy Hill. We did one of our earliest TreeVitalize plantings up there. And you can see the plantings really can be transformational. These are hedge maples. They are what we call a utility compatible species. You can see overhead, these are secondary electrical wires. And if we had planted a tree, what we call a shade tree, a taller growing tree, they would be subject to pruning by the electric company. And so we have these 10-year-old hedge maples. They're great, very hardy street trees. But you can see the shade that they're throwing and that nice healthy canopy there. And they really make a big aesthetic impact in the neighborhood. And right down the street from there, this is Harpster Street in Troy Hill. You can see it's really, really paved over, pretty stark. 10 years later, we have I would say this is about a 40-foot American elm tree. And again, so you can really see that canopy there in that tree and what kind of benefits that provides to that street right there. And across the street, we've got another utility compatible tree. That's an Okami cherry, beautiful flowering tree in the spring. So these are just some examples of how the trees can be transformational from an aesthetic perspective, and you can see how that tree canopy can provide those benefits, such as reducing temperatures in the summer and so forth. So I'm going to jump over to another part of the TreeVitalize project. The Pittsburgh Botanic Garden reached out to TreeVitalize and wanted to apply for trees for a unique site on their property. There, if you're not familiar, the Pittsburgh Botanic Garden is about a 400-acre property in Oakdale. It's adjacent to Settlers Cabin County Park. And it's a large property that's being developed into, obviously, a botanic garden. But this particular site had a history of mining, resource extraction, and they really had to address some acid mine drainage issues here. Now, as they were repairing the land, they knew that they wanted to reforest it, and they came to us. So WPC was actually able to raise some funding specific for this project through the Alcoa Foundation, who subsequently funded, who gave us a series of grants to plant 6.5 acres of more than 3,900 trees on 6.5 acres at this site. So I like to share this project because it is a project that we call restoration or reforestation. And so these kinds of plantings, which we also do through our watershed center, but these kinds of plantings help to reforest a location where there has been some mining or resource extraction or removal of invasive species, for example. But in this particular case, our forester developed a planting plan that was based on an Appalachian Regional Forestry Initiative that's called the Appalachian Reforestation and Recovery Protocol. And it's a method of restoring previously mined lands to a healthy forest. So the plantings, unlike our giant bald and burlap street trees, are bare root saplings. You can see all these beautiful saplings that are here, a range of species, including different kinds of conifers and cedars, and things like black locust, and we actually did some chestnut out there. But these are bare root seedlings that are prepared in a root gel dip for their planting. Special materials in this case, where we have tree tubes, buckets for transporting the saplings around the site, shovels back there, those orange things, they're called dibble bars. They make the little holes to put the saplings in, and then special kinds of stakes over here. So this kind of planting takes a lot of staff time to set it up so that when your volunteers come, you can plant a lot of trees. But when we were doing these plantings, we would do 2 acres at a time, which actually equates to 1,200 trees. So that's a lot of land to cover. So the land is prepared in such a way that there are little hills and valleys that are created, little hummocks and trenches basically, and is done intentionally to help prevent runoff and to help store water on the site. Our very first planting, and I believe this was May 2014, it was 90 degrees and basically a moonscape. So bless these, all these intrepid volunteers who were out there and worked really hard to do our first 1,200 trees out there. And then the next planting, it was 20 degrees. And this picture does show, again, you can see how the land has been intentionally, these little ridges and valleys have been created. But just like all of our other work and all of our other tree work, maintenance and monitoring is extremely important. Ben, one of our staff people, Ben, was here out there stapling little pieces of paper on the ends of the conifers. This is actually a very affordable and what we found effective method for keeping deer from nibbling the buds off of these conifers. So it's a pretty minimal investment. We go out for, a day, say maybe in September or early October, and do what we call bud capping. And then we're also out during the summer. You can see Lauren and Alicia there out a couple summers ago, straightening tubes, resetting stakes. And then also during this time, our forester Brian has been tracking what species are doing well, what species are not doing well, etc. So really keeping an eye on things, and all of that investment really leads to a successful project. So here's a nice image of you can see many of the trees popping out of the top of the tubes. The moonscape is now becoming a little forest of its own. And as we've gone out there, we've seen, little American toads breeding in some of the little ponds that have formed and things like that. So it's very satisfying to have seen this project move forward. So jumping back out to the bigger picture, the wider TreeVitalize project, this is just a map showing the geographical distribution of all of the trees that we planted in the city of Pittsburgh here. And you can see we have a pretty good geographic spread. And then zooming out to the county, you can see we really do have a concentration in the city of Pittsburgh, but we did expand the TreeVitalize program out to the county in 2011. And the demand for trees throughout the county is never ending, continues to grow. And we find that once a community goes through the TreeVitalize Pittsburgh process, the application process once, they've gotten to know us, they know how our process works, and we, within the city and the county, we have long-term friends who have just come back and applied to us over and over again. And the need is really out there, and we've been happy to fulfill that. One quick message about data. WPC has a stellar GIS department, Geographical Information Systems department. All of our tree planting work, every single tree that we plant has a data point, and so we can track all of our work. But we also have tons and tons of data that's available on our website, and you can go to our website and check out all kinds of things. Where are our planters, where are our gardens, where are our canoe access points, where are our protected lands, where are our trails, all kinds of stuff. So check that out some point some point when you get a chance. Okay, so in 2013, we reached an initial goal that was set by DCNR for 20,000 new trees in the Pittsburgh area. Excuse me, and we reached that goal in 2013. And at one point we were planting really almost 4,000 trees a year. And now industry standard for a good community forestry program is that you do a tree inventory every 5 years. Now, one hadn't been done in the city of Pittsburgh since 2005. The Pittsburgh Shade Tree Commission had undertaken that 2005 inventory, and that really laid the groundwork for a lot of the community forestry work that happened in Pittsburgh since then, including TreeVitalize. The city of Pittsburgh's street tree population was not in terrific shape. There were years of work that hadn't been completed. But from that 2005 inventory, the city knew where, for example, a lot of the old dangerous hazard trees had to come down. Now, mind you, this all predates TreeVitalize. But the Shade Tree Commission and then subsequently Tree Pittsburgh, which was an offshoot of the Shade Tree Commission, were able to do a couple $1 million worth of this catch-up necessary work. But it was time for us to do another inventory. And so WPC received a grant from the Heinz Foundation, or the Heinz Endowments, which also had funded some of our TreeVitalize plantings. We knew that the responsible thing to do was to take stock of where we are so that moving forward, we could optimize our collective work with our TreeVitalize partners and optimize the locations for where the trees were going to be where we were going to plant trees. So the partners worked together. We hired the Davie Resource Company through an RFP process, and we hired them to do a complete street tree inventory, meaning they went to every single street tree in the city of Pittsburgh and measured the size of the tree, noted the location, the species, the condition, lots of data points. Now this information all was fed into an analysis model that's called iTree. And that's an analysis model that was developed by the U.S. Forest Service, the University of California, Davis, and the Davie Resource Company. And there are regions for the model across the United States. And so it's accepted as the standard for analyzing tree data because it is so detailed. It takes into account the actual structure, actual composition of your street tree population. And those regions that I mentioned take into account, regional climate, precipitation, even development patterns and things like that. So we feel very good, and I think it's an industry standard that the iTree can give you very good data about your community forest. And what we found was very enlightening. We had, at that time, 33,498 street trees, providing $2.5 million in benefits annually. So those are all those benefits that Tom mentioned in the beginning and that I had mentioned. Particularly in southwestern Pennsylvania, we have very serious problems with air quality and stormwater management and sewage overflows and stormwater runoff. To be able to get a very good handle on the value of these trees was really important. And we found some things that, since the 2005 inventory and since TreeVitalize had started, we had 45% more diverse species. So a whole range of benefits that have informed our work since then. We also, through this process, developed a 10-year street tree management plan that we've been able to raise funding for strategic locations for street trees. That management plan also includes city forestry's role in continuing to do large-scale removals and pruning, and Tree Pittsburgh's role in taking care of all of the young trees that we're planting. Okay, so I'm going to jump over now to another component of TreeVitalize, which is the Allegheny County Parks. Allegheny County Parks, as I said in the beginning, have been a fantastic partner in the TreeVitalize Pittsburgh project, and early on, the county park staff themselves undertook plantings. We awarded trees to the county parks, and they undertook plantings in all 9 county parks. The county parks include over 12,000 acres of land, and that really needed some tree canopy. And in recent years, we've done more in-depth work with the county parks, where we've been a lot more strategic about where trees go, and have made recommendations for trees and other projects, which that's another story for another day. But in regards to trees, you can see Brian here doing some analysis on some trees in one of the county parks, and looking at areas where there are older intact forests, where we want to protect that resource in the county parks. This is actually South Park. You can see the golf course there. But really looking at places where we need tree canopy. So there are a lot of mowed areas in the parks. They're just screaming for a reduction in mowing. You know, that saves the county parks staff time and fuel, et cetera, and then helps us get more of that tree canopy. So Brian, our forester, developed a tree planting plan. This is actually out in South Park, near the skate park that's out there. You can see all the little trees there, and he developed the planting plan. And then we worked with the Pittsburgh Parks Foundation, or I'm sorry, excuse me, the Allegheny County Parks Foundation. Pittsburgh Parks Foundation is another good partner, but in the city of Pittsburgh. We worked with the Allegheny County Parks Foundation, the County Parks Rangers, and the County Parks Department to do a series of plantings throughout the parks. This particular planting, the Rangers brought in a group of 90 13-year-olds to help us plant 40 some of these big bold and burlap trees in South Park. It was a wonderful day. I will say it was the loudest planting that I think we've ever experienced, but it was amazing to see these young people out there, you know, taking it really seriously and having a great time at the same time. So in 2018, we wanted to yet again take a step back and see how our TreeVitalize trees were doing. So our street tree inventory that I just talked about, that was specific to the city of Pittsburgh and included every street tree in the city of Pittsburgh. In this case, we wanted to see how TreeVitalize trees were doing. And since we started in 2008, we were at the 10-year mark in 2018, and WPC and Tree Pittsburgh developed an evaluation protocol that included a random sample of 375 TreeVitalize street trees. Now, that's a statistically significant sample, and we had a whole range of things that we were looking at: species, location, damage, health, all of that. And we thought we'd have good numbers, but we were very pleased to know that we found a 91% survival rate out of this random sample, with 88% of those in good condition. And I think all those components that I talked about before, the forestry expertise, you know, the staff expertise, the quality materials, and the community engagement really help ensure that there is a really good survival rate with these trees. And I will always emphasize that community engagement part, where, you know, we can't keep an eye on these trees indefinitely, you know, from a staff perspective. So engaging those residents from the beginning and the trees that are in their community, I think, is a huge part of the success of this project. So we have this great model through TreeVitalize Pittsburgh, you know, all those things I just mentioned. And, you know, the expertise, the methodology, all of that stuff. And so we knew there was a demand throughout Western Pennsylvania for community forestry work, because we have heard from people. And at the time, we really were maintaining the TreeVitalize Pittsburgh work within Allegheny County just to keep up with the demand there. But we got an opportunity in 2015. We got a generous grant from the Richard King Mellon Foundation to undertake our Trees for Ligonier project. And so a lot of similarities with TreeVitalize, except the fact that this was really a WPC leading this charge, because we were working, you know, far outside of the city of Pittsburgh. But the first thing that we did was develop a really strong partnership with the borough of Ligonier leadership. And so no matter where we go, whether we're doing trees or gardens or green infrastructure or you name it, an essential thing is really the partners, and with especially with trees and green infrastructure, I mean, from my experience, you've got to have the residents on board, and you have to have the leadership involved. They don't necessarily have to bring resources to the table, but they have to be interested in the work and willing to, you know, put time in, the human capital side of it. So, and I will never underestimate the importance of making friends with public works folks, because in the end, those are the guys, and those are the men and women who are maintaining the resource. And then Ligonier, of course, had was pretty well established with their forestry work and had a really strong shade tree commission. So that helped us out too. And the project elements included doing, this was, I think, our first in-house street tree and complete street tree inventory, and our forester Brian undertook that. And then he also did an tree analysis report. So just like the Pittsburgh street tree inventory, but on a smaller scale. And then the project also included tree plantings, including 100 new trees. So there's Brian out there collecting his data. One of the trees, looking at everything, looking for signs of pest and disease and health and size and species, collecting that data and then mapping all of it. And so we thought it made sense to include not just the street trees, but also the park trees. And that red boundary you see is the borough of Ligonier, and that was our scope of work for this project. The township of Ligonier surrounds the borough and is the larger, more rural, agrarian landscape. But the borough itself is if you've been to Ligonier, you know it's a very charming, pretty dense community. And some of the findings that I'll point out for you from the tree analysis, and like I said, Ligonier was had a pretty solid tree game, but this is a situation where we can kind of guide them in the right direction. What we found, looking at their top genera of what kinds of trees that they had existing there, they had 34% of their genera as maples. And so just going back to the concept of diversity is that you don't want to have too many of one kind of tree. And so this was a way for us to say, hey, it's time to hold off on the maples. Let's start planting some other species. The other thing looking at actual species is that we found that the top two types of trees that were in their community, and they're not alone in this, Callery pear and Norway maple, very popular street trees throughout the region. They're hardy, they have good canopy. Pears, for example, flower in the spring, people love that. But both are considered invasive species and they're not native. So we do not, WPC does not plant invasive species of any kind, and we encourage natives as much as possible. So this is an opportunity to just educate our partners about better forestry management practices. And then size distribution. This is just a quick snapshot. We actually have a very good size distribution. It's actually good to have a lot of younger trees that can grow up and keep that canopy healthy, a mid-range of the bigger trees, and then you have a smaller number of your really big canopy trees. So their size distribution was good. But overall, they had a really healthy tree canopy with good and fair. And so all this information, and here's the financial or the economic benefits of the trees. And you can see how the tree analysis model really breaks things down specific. And again, this is data that's specific to the actual composition of the community forest there in Ligonier. And so when you see in a small community like Ligonier, their trees are providing over $80,000 worth of benefits to the community every year. And when you have this kind of information, you know that you can, in good conscience, advocate for more tree plantings and taking care of trees. And so it's a very important advocacy tool and fundraising tool for this community forestry work. Other important components, of course, that community engagement. I'm always going to go back to that for how important that is. We worked with Tree Pittsburgh. That's Joe from Tree Pittsburgh giving a tree tender training there. It's a full day training. Some of the members of the audience there are from the Borough Public Works. That's exactly what we want to have happen. In addition to the residents, we want those public works guys to really feel like they're they're part of the process, because they are. They will be over the long term. And just like in Pittsburgh, we have all of our trees that were hand selected at the nursery are showing up ahead of time. We're offloading them. There's Mara and Kelly, WPC staff, giving the planting demo that I referenced earlier. So all of these project components that we developed through TreeVitalize are volunteers. These are high school science club volunteers from the Ligonier Valley. And then maintenance. There's Lauren out there filling up a gator bag, making sure that those trees are properly watered for the first 2 years. And so we had great success with Ligonier. It was a wonderful, fun project. We loved working with that, and we got the opportunity to expand to Johnstown. And I always say this: no matter where you go, no matter whether it's a poor community, no matter where you go, there are people who want to improve their communities. So Johnstown has had a tough, several decades, much like Pittsburgh. They lost a lot of their industry in the 80s and had seen some economic decline. But there's a lot of energy and effort and things moving in positive directions in Johnstown. And we were able to tap into those folks. They had established their shade tree committee, which is fantastic. And we were able to go in through 2 consecutive, very generous grants from the Community Foundation for the Alleghenies and do the same model, bring that model to Johnstown. So there's Brian out there hugging his trees. We've mapped everything out, and now Johnstown is many, many, many times the size of Ligonier Borough. So comparatively speaking, they have a low tree canopy and a low park tree street and park tree population, comparatively speaking, but still not too bad. We got the condition, again, it was to be expected, much larger area, some parts of Johnstown that were just in decline and a lot of vacant properties. So, but when you have your good data, you know where you're starting from. But still, nevertheless, we're looking at $200,000 at that time that those trees were providing for Johnstown. And again, doing the community engagement through the tree tender training. In Johnstown, we had the Penn State Cooperative Extension. This is Brian Woliniak there on the right. He's a Penn State Cooperative Forester. They also do a tree tender training program, so it was great to have Brian come out. We actually did three tree tender trainings in Johnstown over the course of our 2 phases of work there. And again, getting those volunteers out, getting their hands dirty. These are some plantings right there in the park in downtown Johnstown along the river there. And then maintenance. Alicia's on the far right and Sean's on the far left. They went out and they engaged the Johnstown Youth Corps. And it's a job training program for high school students and young people in Johnstown. These young people get paid and they get to experience a wide range of professional experiences. And we were able to get them out there and teach them about community forestry. Why would you want to plant trees? How do you plant trees? And with the concept of, we love doing this any chance we get, because the thought is maybe one of these young people might think, hey, I could work for the Conservancy someday. Maybe I could maybe I could become a forester, or maybe I could become a forestry program manager, or what have you. So those have been fantastic projects, and we'll continue to take on projects like this as funding and capacity allow. 2 recent projects that I will just touch on very quickly. We did more comprehensive breeding analyses projects in the city of Clairton and Harrison Township here in Allegheny County, looking at opportunities for green infrastructure, doing some municipal code review for them. But the tree inventories and tree plantings, we brought that model to both of these projects, and we were able to do complete street tree inventories and analysis reports for these communities and undertake tree planting. So laying that groundwork for good community forestry programs in both of those communities. Okay, so I'm going to move into one of our favorite projects, one of my favorite projects, and I think it's a pretty fun, unique project that we've been able to take on, is the Pittsburgh Redbud Project. The concept for the project came to us through a landscape architect. His name's Frank Dawson. He was introduced to us through our friends at the River Life Task Force, or River Life at this point. And he had a concept to do significant plantings of featuring the redbud, the native redbud, in and around the city of Pittsburgh, something akin to the Cherry Blossom Festival in Washington, D.C. And we loved the idea, and we were able to raise funding through the Colcom Foundation to launch this project in 2016. We are actually now entering phase 4 of the project, and we've been planting every spring and fall through the Pittsburgh Redbud Project since that spring of 2016. Oh, and I should say that this image was a mock-up before we started the project, but I dare say that we're not too far off from actually having a spring visual in real life that looks like this. But the redbud tree, it's a hardy native tree with these beautiful deep pink purple blossoms every spring. And even in the summertime, it has a beautiful heart-shaped leaf. And again, the scope of the project is really what we call this view shed around downtown Pittsburgh. So we built partnerships, again, going back to the importance of partnerships. City of Pittsburgh Forestry has been a huge asset to us in helping us with doing site preparation and these major plantings. We developed a very close relationship with the Sports and Exhibition Authority because we were planting on all throughout the North Shore. You can see all those little purple dots are all new trees along the North Shore. Lots of plantings in Point State Park, so working with DCNR again in Point State Park, and then up on Mount Washington with the Pittsburgh Parks Conservancy and the Mount Washington CDC. And I will say that we did not throw our diversity requirements out the window when it came to doing these, the Pittsburgh Redbud Project. We still plant a diverse array of trees and shrubs and perennials actually through this project, but we feature the redbud, but we're also planting a lot of other plant material. And just with all of our other programming, we're involving volunteers. This is a planting at the Carnegie Science Center. That was an 80-degree fall day. So we, again, a wide range of temperatures, even when you're planting in the fall and the spring. And a very cold, snowy planting up on Mount Washington. Here's a little restoration-sized redbud peeking out of a tube here. This is a former landslide area that was stabilized, and we are doing a restoration planting in this area. Tree Pittsburgh also has done some plantings up here, but we planted a lot of redbuds up there. So if you're on the West End Bridge or over on the North Shore, you can look up across the river up above the Ohio and see that area. And then just a few shots of some of the installations that we've done through this project. So you can see the North Shore Riverfront Park, where we've removed some sod and installed some redbuds. And over time, we've integrated more native plantings in here, and you can see maintenance with our gator bags on here, making sure that we maintain all of those new trees. The Gateway Median Islands downtown are looking a little shabby. There was just basically a carpet of euonymus there, which we removed in sections and then came in with a wide range of native species. There's some inkberry hollies, lots of beautiful grasses and redbuds. And then Point State Park, this is coming in off the Fort Duquesne Bridge. You can see we had a huge planting. We planted 124 trees with over 100 Pitt students on this particular day. And Frank Curto Park, another sort of open area along that beautiful boulevard there. And then this is a really interesting part. This is the North Shore, along the North Shore River, Three Rivers Heritage Trail, where we worked with the city of Pittsburgh, who removed almost a monoculture of non-native Japanese hemlock, not Japanese hemlock, I'm sorry, honeysuckle. And then we were able to come in and do extensive native plantings. And these are some of the bigger materials that we planted with volunteers. And then we worked with some special groups of high school students here to do some of the smaller restoration plantings. And then again, working with some young people. This is a group from the Student Conservation Association. Megan and Alicia are our staff flanking the young people there. And this is a program where the young people are being paid to learn a bunch of different work experiences. And again, we're getting them out there, helping us mulch and weed and water these trees, and hoping maybe someday that maybe some of these young people would go into conservancy or community forestry work. Having lots of volunteer events, getting folks out there to help us weed and mulch. It might not sound super important, but it is. It helps cut back on the work that we need to do. It's getting people out there, understanding that these plantings are important and that they can help us with the health and well-being of them. And then we also do have ongoing tree giveaways through the Pittsburgh Redbud projects, so folks can get a free tree to take home and plant in their yard. And this is a photo from one of our special events out there. You can see how excited we all are about the Redbud project and getting to work with all these volunteers and partners on the project. And that's my presentation, and I really appreciate having the opportunity to share this information with all of you. We appreciate your member support so much. I think you could probably imagine that the pandemic, it's affected everyone, and it's affected the Conservancy, and we are experiencing some challenges to funding this year. So I know your members, but if you are able, you can make an additional contribution to us at waterlandlife.org/donate. So please consider that. My information is down there. Feel free to call me or email me anytime with any questions about this work. This webinar is going to be recorded, and you can access it afterwards, so you can go through and access this information as well. And I think we're going to do some questions.
So Jeff, I just want to thank you. Your presentation was wonderful. We always appreciate the expertise and the thoughtfulness you bring to this work, but also the energy. And it seems like a project area at the Conservancy where every single day, every single project makes our city and our region nicer. So Nicole Walsh has joined us. She is with the Conservancy also, and she's going to help us moderate with some questions. And I see that we have several interesting, good questions that have come in.
Hi, everyone. Jeff, the first question is, how do you ensure that the street side trees will not be affected by road salt? And also in tandem with that is, what is the main reason or reasons that a new tree doesn't survive its first few years?
Good question. So in areas where there is a lot of salt spray, and I won't dance around this topic, salting, sodium chloride does have a big impact on trees. So trees where along streets, more like in business districts where cars are going pretty fast, we will wrap the trunks. We have been experimenting with some different approaches, including just salt protection. So putting up barriers with some burlap and things like that. We're going to be doing that more extensively. We did a bunch of trees on Carson Street in partnership with the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure and City Forestry last year. The other strategy, in a lot of more residential neighborhoods, the salt spray is not a huge issue, but just the species selection can have a big impact. So there are species that are more salt tolerant, and the foresters do take that into consideration. Nothing is foolproof. We do have information about getting more plant-friendly de-icing material. We have worked with partners downtown and in business districts about providing them information about costs and efficacy of de-icers that are more plant-friendly. In terms of what are the big factors that contribute to a tree's decline in the first couple years, I will say it is rare. Because we do front load the process with so much quality control that we don't see it too often. Not watering is the #1 thing. So a tree has to be watered. Through TreeVitalize, we do get that commitment from the individual property owners that they're going to water the trees. When we do trees in business districts or any of the trees through our regional projects or the Redbud project, we actually dedicate staff time for those first 2 growing seasons to ensure that that watering happens. So the watering really can be a big issue. Another thing, quite frankly, is every once in a while, despite quality control, there might be a specimen that just fails. It's not a good specimen. You know, despite all our efforts, maybe there was, the root ball was cracked when it was being offloaded. Those are rare circumstances. But I would say by far and wide, if we're going to lose a tree, it's because it's not been watered.
Next question, why the bias evident for planting deciduous trees? Is there a place for using coniferous trees such as in off-street community forests with paths or trails?
That's a fantastic question. I would love to line the streets with conifers. There are some trees that we've used, bald cypress actually, are extremely salt tolerant. And there are a few places in the city that we have planted them where the foresters thought the space could accommodate them. But your typical spruces and hemlocks and things like that, their structure prevents us from really being able to use them widely as street trees. So their natural form is not conducive to having them in those tree wells. Now, when we do through the Pittsburgh Redbud Project and any of our park or open space or trail plantings, there's always, and I push for it too because I love conifers, and I think that they add seasonal interest in everything. But our foresters do incorporate conifers. I think they even have a certain percentage that in open space, I think it's 10% or maybe it's more. I'm sorry, I don't know right off the top of my head. But where we can plant them, we do. One really nice example of where we have planted a lot of conifers specific for air quality remediation is in Millville. If you're going along Route 28, there's a hillside right there as you're going into Millville. And we were able to do a wide range of conifers in that location because conifers do air quality remediation all year round. So we love them. We do them as much as is reasonable and as much as we can, but we don't plant them as street trees. And that, coincidentally, that's also a city specification.
Okay. Are you concerned about Dutch elm disease infecting the American elm trees that you've planted?
Yes. The American elm trees that we have planted, we're actually starting to pull back on elm trees because the hybrid that we use pretty widely early on, we've seen some susceptibility. There are a couple different cultivars. There's one called the Morton Glossy. It has a smaller, glossier leaf. If you're on Penn Avenue going along the Allegheny Cemetery, there's a lot of really big Morton Glossy elms along there. They've done well. I think the Princeton elms, that's unfortunately one of the ones that was planted in Troy Hill that looks so healthy. It's still doing fine, but yes, we are seeing some Dutch elm coming in and affecting some of it. And just for reference, those American elms are, it's taken decades to develop these elms. So they're basically bred and bred and bred until they're almost like 90-some% American elm, but they have enough of, I think, European or Asian elm in them that resists that disease, but it's not foolproof. So we've seen a lot of success. They're a hardy, fast-growing, beautiful tree, but we are seeing some decline. And I will add a note. We did do that project in Harrison Township, and there's a street. Some folks might be aware of this street. It's called Carlisle Street in Harrison Township, and it is lined with European elms, and it's stunning. It's like you could film like, you know, a movie there. But they are starting to lose a tree here and there from Dutch elm's disease. So we do see it. It is a concern, and we're keeping an eye on it.
Okay, next question. Do you work with metropolitan areas beyond Western Pennsylvania to share programmatic ideas?
Sharing ideas, absolutely. Our work we really need to have, if we can identify funding and we have the staff capacity to take on a project, we'll take it on. Those, like the Ligonier and the Johnstown projects, they, stars aligned with funding and, us having the capacity to do it. Short of that, I think I was just sharing our planting specifications with Sewickley Borough yesterday. Any information that we have, I don't consider proprietary in any way, shape, or form. I share our street tree specifications, anything that we have that is useful, we share with anyone that we can, if it's useful. Anybody that is interested in how we do things, they can just reach out to me, and I'm happy to talk to people. We can do presentations, that kind of thing. So we're happy to provide and share information wherever it's needed.
Okay, and this will have to be our last question. Could you comment on which tree species have had the highest survivability rates and which the lowest?
Let me start with lowest. One of the things that we have been surprised by is the decline in honey locust. You guys might be familiar with the honey locust. It has the fine little leaves. They're popular in landscaping in urban areas because of that tiny little compound leaf that they have. You don't have to rake them up. They have for decades been a go-to because they're hardy and they're pretty and they're easy to maintain. But for some reason, we're just seeing decline in them. I would have to defer to the foresters. I'm not sure what it is. I think it might be a fungal issue, but we're seeing them failing. So anytime we see something failing, we pull back on that, just like we're doing with the elms. Not that the elms are widely failing, but when we see something starting to decline, we start to pull back. I think one of the species that actually surprised me for how hardy they are, now mind you, they're very slow growing, are white oaks. We don't plant red oaks because they're susceptible to oak wilt. But some of the white oaks that we've planted, there's a stretch of them at the corner of Liberty and Balm, down by the hotel that's there. There's also some of them in the Strip District. They're like star performers. They're very hardy, they're beautiful, and if they're happy, they live for like hundreds of years. Some other things, red buds and service berries, we use those as utility compatible street trees. They're both very hardy and they're wonderful because they have the ancillary benefits of providing a lot of food and habitat for wildlife. Other than that, I would say, that's what I would say for street trees. The foresters would probably disagree with me, but these are my observations. So I would say white oaks as shade trees, and the serviceberry and the red buds, and also the hedge maples are really strong utility compatible performers.
So I think we are at the end of our hour, but Nicole, thank you for moderating. And Jeff, thank you for presenting, and most of all for planting 37,000 trees for us around Pittsburgh and our region. We appreciate it all. It was a great presentation.
Thank you.
See you all, and thank you for joining us.
All right.
We can answer the other questions by type. We'll either message back or email back to you for the other questions. Thank you all so much.